Now I sent friend Watson to Sherman's, the bird stuffers. I told him he would recognize the place by a rather charming tableau of a weasel attacking a rodent in the window. I requested Watson to bring back with him a mongrel dog, Toby. I would rather have Toby's help than all of the combined might of Scotland Yard. By the time friend Watson had arrived, thankfully Athelney Jones had found something else to occupy himself with. Therefore, that gave me a few more precious moments. I needed to test for myself, by walking atop the rooftops, whether indeed it would have been possible for the accomplice to have got in that way. Watson, up above, we clambered into the garret, and then to the open skylight. Watson remained behind whilst I, with a piece of cord, made my way across the rooftops to the chimney stacks, and then down again. By then Watson and Toby were waiting for me outside. It was a precarious enough descent, but not impossible. What one man, after all, can achieve, another can replicate. Down the water pipe. Well, down below, of course, there was a water barrel with a lid in situ. Yes, no doubt that is how the accomplice was able to reach once again terra firma. Now, I had dipped a handkerchief within some of the spilt carbolic acid and the creosote from the broken carboy. Toby! Sniff. Toby's tail wagged excitedly, and then I flung the handkerchief far across the lands. Toby, within a matter of moments, picked up the scent, and then we set off. As I said to friend Watson, if the accomplice is anywhere to be seen around here, then rest assured Toby will be able to find him. Now, as we made our way through the fields, crisscrossing the holes that rather put me in mind of the work of giant moles, evidence indeed of the frantic efforts that the Sholto brothers had put in to find the missing treasure, I outlined to friend Watson at what point we had arrived so far. Now let us say at the bottom of this, at the cause of all of this problem, there is a treasure. This originated in India. Morstan and Sholto both served in the same regiment. Let us say, therefore, that Morstan went back upon his word. Now these four individuals, Jonathan Small, well, evidently he is the owner of the wooden leg. You'll recollect also his name is upon that curious piece of paper of the sign of the four. The reason why he could not avail himself of the treasure is that he is a convict, incarcerated. Therefore, Morstan and Sholto, they were in charge of guarding the convicts. The reason why Small did not take the treasure, he was unable to. We will surmise that Captain Morstan went back upon his word. He left the penal colony. He brought the treasure back with him over here to Norwood. Upon hearing of this, Jonathan Small was consumed with revenge. He would have thought nothing more and nothing else of bringing vengeance down upon the head of the gentleman who had wronged him so. Now you may wonder how I was able to ascertain an approximation of Small's description. Well, of course, he would be sunburned. He has been overseas for this length of time. Naturally, the skin upon the palms of his hands would have been shaved, having slipped down the rope that enabled him to make his escape. He was small. This was easily ascertained by measuring the lengths of strides he had taken. Also that he was angry at the accomplice. Well, you'll recollect that I note he had stamped upon the spot there the marks of the timber toe in the dust. Yes, he managed to scale up the wall of Pondicherry Lodge, then had seen what his ally had done by murdering Brother Bartholomew. Then no doubt he had thrashed him with a rope. Then he had made his escape the way he had come in, bearing the treasure. The accomplice had gone back into the garret and through the hall, across the rooftops and down the water pipe. Now, at that point, Toby had led us as far as Broad Street to the very edge of the river. It is evident, therefore, that they'd boarded a vessel. And then just over there I saw a sign beside a small, somewhat nondescript-looking shanty. Mr. Mordecai Smith, boats for hire by the hour or the day. Huh. Well, I sent Watson back with Toby. I was sending my thanks and appreciation to Mr. Sherman. Then I determined that I would inquire of this Mordecai Smith as to whether he had recently had business transactions with a Mr. Jonathan Small, a timber toe himself. I knocked upon the door. A woman answered. Mrs. Smith. Yes, I wonder if your husband, Mordecai Smith, is present. I've heard wonderful things regarding his boats, and I would very much like to hire one for... Oh, you say he is not here? You don't know where he is? Oh, dear. Well, I was rather desirous of... In the middle of the night, you say? A man with a wooden leg? Well, how on earth, Mrs. Smith, did you... Oh, of course, the sound of the stump tapping upon the cobblestones. Yes, wonderful. Yeah, well, I wonder, when might you expect Mr. Mordecai Smith to... Oh, he's been gone for 2 days now. Oh, dear. Well, I will ask further along the riverfront. You see, I have heard wonderful things regarding his boat, the Aurora, of course, that is it. Yeah, that is the trim vessel, green with the black... Oh, my mistake, no, black, of course, with the 2 red stripes upon the side, yes. And the Aurora, of course, with the red stripes. Yeah, well, you be sure to, here I have my card, be sure to communicate with me should you hear from Mr. Smith. As to its funnel, of course, it's white, is it not, with, oh no, black. Yes, black with a white bar. Yeah, sorry, I was confusing this vessel with another that had been recommended to me. Oh, no, and it was good, of course, as your husband's. Yes, well, I do hope, Mrs. Smith, he returns very soon. Good day, madam. Thank you for your help. Once more at Baker Street, I summoned a gathering of the irregulars. You may indeed remember their work if you are familiar with the Jefferson Hope business. A study in Scarlet. I reasoned that if the Aurora were anywhere above water, then the irregulars should be able to find her. They see everything, they hear everything. I had just finished my breakfast when I heard something of a commotion down in the hallway. The voice of Mrs. Hudson remonstrating with their leader, Wiggins. Suddenly the street arrows themselves came bounding into the room. Please let us have a degree of order, Wiggins! Now, I assign them all the task of finding the vessel, the Aurora. I describe it to them. The usual rates of pay, and a guinea to the irregular who finds her. Go. I reasoned that it was only a matter of time before the Aurora should be found this way, and yet the hours passed and still she remained concealed. And so it was the next day. I decided to investigate the riverside myself, disguised as a somewhat disreputable old sailor. A success at last. I reasoned, you understand, that it would be imperative for Jonathan Small to be able to gain access to the Aurora at a moment's notice. Now, evidently, the vessel could not have been scuppered. Therefore, if I were Jonathan Small, I would have done the following. I would have had the vessel sent into a boatyard on the pretense of some slight alteration or repair. Then it would be safely removed from the main thoroughfare of the river, but be accessible at a moment's notice. Also, it was important for him to keep his rather unusual accomplice hidden away from public view. They'll be wishing to make their escape sooner rather than later. Now, all of this I informed Anthony Jones and friend Watson when I returned to my rooms in Baker Street later that day, flushed with success. One of the irregulars had been stationed opposite to the entrance to Jacobson's boatyard, where the Aurora was in wait. And as for that night, still I remember it so well. I had instructed Anthony Jones to charter a police launch and to have a number of men aboard her. Friend Watson and I there also. We were stationed opposite to Jacobson's yard, awaiting the emergence of the vessel that we had saw. Finally, in the distance I could see there, the irregular stationed at his post, waving. "The Aurora there! There she goes! Burn the boats, men! Do everything you can, but we must catch her!" And so began a furious pursuit across the choppy waters of the Thames. The vessel, the Aurora, ahead, Watson, I, and Anthony Jones giving chase in the police launch behind. By degrees, we gained upon her. But it was curious. In the stern of the Aurora, I could see Timbertoe himself, Mr. Jonathan Small, but that strange shape beside him, rather resembling a Newfoundland dog. Small was shaking his fist at us, in anger, in fury. "Be careful, Watson. Should his accomplice be there, should you see him clasp a blowpipe to his lips, then I urge you to fire at will. I have no intention of either one of us being added to his list of murder victims." At that point, this nondescript shape emerged from a sheet of tarpaulin. It was the accomplice himself, his teeth gnashing, scarce 3 feet in height. Immediately, he clapped a pipe to his mouth. "Watson, fire!" Simultaneously, our revolvers rang out. The pygmy accomplice flung up his hands, whirled around, and then toppled overboard. His lifeless corpse sank to the bottom of the Thames. Now there it remains even to this day, now reduced to sludge and bones. As for the thorn that very nearly sealed our fate, there it was, embedded in the wooden hide of the Aurora between us. Again we pursued that vessel. "Burn the boat, men, we must! We're gaining on them, see!" I could see Jonathan Small shouting orders at Mordecai Smith. The vessel veered to the right, heading toward the Plumtree Marshes. Eventually, it ran aground. Jonathan Small flung himself over the sides. No doubt he thought to make his escape via the mud flats. Yet evidently he knew the game was up. It was only a matter of time, a case of if and not when he was apprehended. He had only gone so far when his wooden leg had sunk all the way up to the knee. He flailed and gesticulated angrily at us, his rage incoherent, his fury apparent. One of Anthony Jones's men flung a rope toward him and hauled him in as though Small was some evil fish. We hauled him above board, and then, with him safely in irons, Anthony Jones, friend Watson, and Jonathan Small made our way back to the rooms in Baker Street. Now, the tale that Mr. Jonathan Small had to say was indeed no tray, a bizarre one. The narrative was begun there upon the police launch and concluded in Baker Street. For the ease of your greater understanding, I will present it to you now as one continuous, flowing narrative. I'll tell you this now. I had nothing to do with Bartholomew Sholto's death. That was Tonga's business. I had no argument with Bartholomew Sholto or the other one. It was the father, John Sholto. I would gladly have swung for him. Tonga was strutting like a bloody peacock when I clambered up, so I'd used one of them poisonous darts on him. I was livid. I thrust him with the rope. I say this to you now. I don't want that going against me at the trial either. I have to laugh. Oh, that money. The Agra Treasure. Worth £500,000 sterling. And I'm as entitled to it as any man. For the first half of my life, I spent digging a breakwater out in the Andamans. The rest of it, digging ditches in Dartmoor. I was from Worcestershire, originally. I think my family was disappointed in me. Well, there was religious, God-fearing folk, you know. Well, I was of an age, got into a bit of trouble with a girl. Got a girl into a bit of trouble. I wasn't given much of a choice. I had to take the Queen's shilling. Enlist. I never was lucky for long. Hey! No sooner was I over there, stationed in India, decided, go for a swim, the Ganges, halfway across it. Crocodile came after me. If not for one of the other soldiers coming to my rescue, I'd lost enough blood there and then anyway. It took the leg. The other fellow saved me. Invalided out of the army almost as soon as I'd begun. But I could still ride a horse. I was hard working. I'd made a good impression. That was I able to become an overseer. The plantation, a friend of the captain's, Abel White was his name. I became friends with him. Mr. White was a good employer. All I had to do was ride up and down on horseback, making sure his workers didn't slack off. I thought I was set up for life. Well, you would have heard the spot of bother they had over there. The uprising, the rebels. Abel White was warned. He said he needed to get his workers, his family well out of the way, but no, he said he wouldn't be driven away from everything he worked so hard for. Who can blame him? I remember that day. I've been overseeing that day at a plantation some miles away. When I come back, I saw the smoke climbing skyward. Got closer. The entire place had been burnt to the ground. Abel White's plantation. The rebels had been here. And I saw the bodies burning, hacked to pieces. Mr. White, his family. They were good people. I regarded them as friends. Well, the uprising was such. All the Europeans were pushed back. The city of Agra. I followed him. But you see, all of our old troops, what formerly had fought for the empire, all the skills what they had been taught from us were now using them against us. They invaded the city. We was driven back into the old fort. We had hundreds of rifles, hundreds of men against their thousands, millions it felt like. And there were two parts to the fort, the new part and then the old. Or the old part, huge, acres and acres. People did not dare venture in there. They would get lost. It was left for the scorpions and the centipedes to after themselves. It was far too big for the men that we had to be stationed around it adequately. We had to do as best we could. Me was each given a firelock. A couple of servants that have remained faithful. We had to protect the women folk and the children. Well, I was stationed at one of these posts. I was given two men, Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, fearsome-looking individuals. They knew the language well enough, but they kept themselves to themselves. The third night I was stationed there with them. The weather was miserable. I tried to speak to them, even in their own lingo. They didn't want to know. They just kept whispering to themselves. Still, I thought at least they were loyal. Loyal to the British. I thought I'd have a smoke of some baccy. I put my firelock down. Next thing I know, there was onto me, the big one, Muhammad Singh, had a dagger to my throat, hissed into my ear through his teeth. If I make a move, he'd slit my throat there and then. Well, I thought this was meant to be an uprising. I thought the women and the children were in harm. I thought they belonged to the rebels. I was about to scream out. I did not care if they killed me. I was going to give warning. I had to protect the women. It was as though Muhammad Singh read my thoughts. He assured me they were not rebels, they were loyal. The crown, the women and the children were safe. There was something about him that rang true. He said if I raised the alarm, he would have no choice but to kill me. I stayed quiet, therefore. What he had to tell me was to do with this Raja in the northern provinces. Oh, he'd been playing both sides. I mean to say the company and the rebels. He had fantastic wealth. He had divided it, though. He didn't mean to lose out, whichever side won. The money, the gold and the silver he kept by himself, there in his palace or his castle. As for the rest, The diamonds, the rubies, the stones. He had said, in the company of one of his servants, this servant, Muhammad Singh told me, was posing as a merchant. He was going to come over into the fort. He was going to bury it there. So that when all the dust would settle, this Raja would still have his jewels. Muhammad Singh said to me, this merchant would not be travelling alone. Muhammad Singh said his half-brother, Dost Akbar, he was accompanying this merchant. This merchant whose life would not be worth that. Was I with them? That's what Singh asked. They were going to murder the merchant. Take the treasure. Divide it between the four of us. Me and the other three. The four. Always the four with us. No, I did not know anything. The thought of a quarter share of that wealth, more than I could resist. Yeah, I said, I'm with them. The sign of the four always with us. Before long, the merchant was there. This short, fat fellow in a yellow turban. That would be Dost Akbar. With him, savage-looking fellow, a beard all the way down to his cummerbund. I felt terrible, knowing what was about to happen to this man, this merchant, this servant to the Raja. He looked so pitiful, like a mouse. He looked up at me, asking if he could be admitted to the fort for safety. My heart started to soften toward him, but I knew that Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, they were listening to everything. If I listened to any more, my heart would have weakened. I said, Dost Akbar went in with him. I tried not to think what was going to happen. He looked so bloody trusting. And they went into the old fort. Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, either side of him. It was followed by Dost Akbar. And then inside I heard this scream, a scuffle, and then the merchant came running out, blood across his face, screaming for help. I felt so sorry for him. Akbar was running him down like a tiger, bounding after him. But I thought of the jewels. I stuck the firelock between the merchant's feet. He fell over, tumbled twice and was still. I hope he broke his neck. I hope he was already dead before Akbar plunged his dagger into his side twice. We carried the body into the old part of the fort. We buried it in a shallow grave. As for the treasure, $500,000 sterling, diamonds, rubies, sapphires. We made a careful note of where it was. I drew up a plan. Carefully. We all four signed it. Jonathan Small, Dost Akbar, Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, the sign of the four. We buried the treasure where the ground had sunk in of its own accord. There we would leave it for the notice of the scorpions and the centipedes, till everything had calmed down again, and then calmly we would come back. We would retrieve our fortunes. Well, you don't need me to tell you what happened. That uprising was quelled soon enough. They found out about the merchant. You understand, this Raja had sent the merchant, but then to look over him he'd sent an even more trusted servant. He wondered where he had gone. The first one with the treasure. He gained admittance to the fort. Went asking around. They found the body, though it did not take them long to realise who had done it. It was all placed under arrest. They did not find the treasure. Our treasure! Khan Akbar Singh, it was sentenced for life. I was sentenced to death. This was commuted, though. Penal servitude. So from Agra, I was sent to Blair Island, then to the Andamans. God-forsaken spot. Savages there, pygmies, would shoot a poisoned dart into your hide as much as look at you. I had a good way about me. I was made an assistant to one of the surgeons there, dispensing medicine. This surgeon was fond of playing cards. So was I. I used to stand in the shadows of his surgery and watch him play. With some of the other officers, it was good as having a hand of my own. That is how I met Arthur Morstan, John Sholto. They were the two of the ones that played. Oh, they always lost heavily, Morstan especially. I would hear them bemoaning their losses as I waited inside my tent. Morstan was beginning to drink more than was good for him. I eavesdropped to what they were saying to each other. Now, Sholto was losing so much money, he would carry on playing, hoping that his luck would turn, and then it didn't, and he was even more in debt. And then he took to the drink. A fool's game. Oh, I got to thinking, could I not use this to my advantage? One day I got this. Sholto alone, I said to him, hypothetically, like, changing some of the details so he would not know. I told him about the treasure, how it was forfeit. And the Raja himself now outlawed, therefore. Them who found it, kept it. I said, what should I do? By right, should I hand it over to the authorities? Oh, I got his interest. He told me to say nothing of this to anyone else. He would mull it over for a day or so and then come back. And he would. Captain Morstan. Always Morstan was the more level-headed of the two. Sholto told me to explain again. This is when I told them what I wanted in return. Sholto and Morstan were to share a fifth between themselves. Oh, Sholto did not like this. He bridled, but Morstan told him, shh. I said I had the wealth. I knew where it was. But I was trapped here. All I needed was a vessel. If that could be put off the coast somewhere to allow me to get away from this swamp. Also, I wished liberty for my 3 friends, Akbar, Singh, Khan, always the 4 with us. If they could promise me that, and Sholto and Morstan could share a 5th, that would still be enough for them to save their skins. There was a final meeting. To this, my 3 comrades were there. It was agreed. The 4 of us put our mark to it, the sign of the 4. All we needed was for Sholto to uphold his end of the bargain. He lied, he betrayed us. You see, he had said he wanted to go to the fort at Agra to verify what we had said. Well, the plan had been that he would go there. Then he would inform his colleague, Morstan. And then he and I would travel to the Agra fort itself. Morstan would take the share for himself and Sholto. Then I would be allowed my freedom. Morstan had received word. Sholto had left, gone back on one of the boats to England. He'd bought his way out of the army. And then, when Morstan went to the fort, found the treasure was gone. You betrayed us all. From that moment on, I wanted nothing more than his blood on my hands. Captain, Sholto would pay for what he had done to me and the others. He got to the point where I did not even care for the treasure. It was his neck wrung. By then, I'd made for myself a friend, one of those pygmies that crawled away to die. Tonga. I nursed him back to health. I knew enough of his lingo. I went to the trouble. He developed a fondness for me, like a dog. Took to following me around. I found out that he had a canoe of his own. I realised that then, that was how I could get away from this place, travel to England, find out where Sholto lived. Kill him. Tonga did not betray me. Just off the coast late that night, he was there. With his back to us, there was this warden had always gone out of his way to belittle me, to make my life difficult. I will give him something to remember Jonathan Small by. I wanted to bash his brains in. I looked around for a rock, couldn't find nothing. And then I remember my timber toe. I unscrewed my leg. 3 long hops, and I was onto him. Bashed in his skull. I do not regret it. Once I was convinced he would not bully anyone else no more. I screwed the wooden leg back in and went on my way with Tonga. We sailed for so long. You need not know how I was able to find where Sholto lived. Pondicherry Lodge, that does not concern you. I once arrived in England. I found him. All this while we've been forced to beg. I was putting Tonga on display at fairs, making him dance, eat raw meat, for pennies and coppers flung our way. When I was rightfully in possession of a fortune. That night, Sholto died. I was looking in at the window. I got there too late. One of them came running out after me. I watched him give up the hunt. I was hidden away in the bushes. Later, I went inside, looking for any paperwork, looking for any clue, looking for that treasure. I wanted it to be known who was responsible for this, and I pinned the sign of the four to his breast. I wanted the world to know, them that would know, I'd been avenged. My informant kept me abreast of how their quest for the treasure was going there, digging up the grounds. By this same informant I learned. And Bartholomew Sholto had found it. I knew the lie of the land well enough. I had planned that we would wait until Bartholomew had left the garret run. He was down having dinner. Then we were going to get it. I had no argument with the children. I did not wish to see Bartholomew killed. I sent Tonga ahead of me. He saw Bartholomew there. He fired one of those blasted darts. Thorns sticking out of his skin. By the time Tonga hauled me up, through that window I saw the dead man. But I took the treasure. And with it I was lowered back down to the ground. Oh, incidentally, Mordecai Smith knows nothing about the affair. All he knew enough was to sail me and Tonga out to a vessel, the Esmeralda. And then we would have made good our escape, begun our lives anew. George, you want to know where the treasure is now? Well, if Mr. Sherlock Holmes was clever enough to find me, to place me under arrest, then I knew you would be clever enough to find a treasure, which is why I did what I did. Now, you may have the trunk there. And when you opened it, I may imagine the look of surprise upon your faces to see it empty. You can have the trunk as a souvenir. For the treasure itself, that has gone the way where Tonga is. Down at the bottom of the river. If Sherlock Holmes can find me, then he'll easily be able to retrieve a treasure chest. But If that treasure was scattered over 5 miles or more, not even Sherlock Holmes should be able to find that. Not so easily. The first half of my life, digging a breakwater in the Andamans, and now the rest. Digging ditches in Dartmoor. So now you know. The secret of the Agra Treasure. The answer to the riddle of the sign of the four. Why I spent so many years thirsting for vengeance. Now you know the unhappy tale of me, Mr. Jonathan Small. And truly a remarkable account. I'm sure you'll agree. The one thing that did trouble me, now I had picked up the small bag containing all of Tonga's poisonous darts. And yet, there was the dart that had embedded itself into the Aurora's timber. Between friend Watson and I. Ah, yes, of course. Of course, there was already a dart still left within. The pie, of course. Well, Anthony Jones led Jonathan Small away. To a prison cell. As for Watson, now that Miss Mary Morstan had had this fortune of hers removed from the equation, therefore he was at total liberty to woo her, to pursue her, to court her as only friend Watson would be able to. A romance is highly problematic. You may as well introduce an elopement into the fifth proposition of Euclid, or to have a crack in the lens of some finely tuned scientific instrument. Leads to chaos. And so here I am, waiting in Baker Street for the next scientific problem to present itself to me. I trust the wait will not be too long. At least until then, you know where you may find me, should any of you wish to engage my professional services. Know you, therefore, my fees are upon a fixed scale. I never vary them, save I remit them altogether. The work itself is its own highest reward. Work, you understand. What else is there to live for?